Okay, today we're going to look at the complex number system, and that is just a way to categorize all numbers. Okay, so the first thing is this big square, all right, this big square here, and inside of it is the word complex numbers. And that's because every single number, whether it has a pi or a square root or an I, or it's a fraction or a decimal or not a fraction or decimal, every single number is a complex number. Okay? Then complex numbers break into two categories: real numbers and imaginary numbers. Now, imaginary numbers are all the numbers with i's. If it doesn't have an I, then it is a real number. Well, real numbers then break into two more categories. You have rational numbers and irrational numbers. Irrational numbers are numbers that contain things like pi or square roots that you cannot break down. All right, those are irrational. If it doesn't have a pi or a square root that you cannot break down, then it must be rational. And under rational, you can then subcategorize numbers into integers, whole numbers, and or natural numbers. So let's look at some definitions for all of these, okay? Let's start with complex numbers. Complex numbers, this one's easy, are all numbers, no matter what, all numbers. So if I ask you if a number is complex, yes, it is. Every single number is complex. Well, then I said complex numbers break into imaginary or real. Imaginary or real. And again, imaginary numbers contain I. If it doesn't contain I, it must be real. So doesn't contain I. All right, that's the difference between those two. Okay, then if it is real, it can be irrational or rational. All right? Irrational are numbers that cannot be written as a fraction. So numbers that can not be written as a fraction. Which would include decimals that do not repeat and do not terminate. And those typically contain pi's or square roots of numbers that you cannot break down. Now, it doesn't matter if they're positive or negative, but it contains a pi or square roots that you cannot simplify. Okay? Now, everything else falls under the rational category. So the rational are numbers that can be written as fractions. And that would include decimals that repeat, like 0.333333, and fractions that terminate, like 1.5. Okay? So 0.3 repeating is 1/3, and that's why it's rational, because it can be written as a fraction. 1.25 is also rational because it can be turned into a fraction. That would be 5/4. But if I gave you a fraction, that's automatically rational. And numbers that are not fractions, like 2 and 6 and -6, those are also rational because you can turn any number like that into a fraction by putting it over 1. Okay, now, if the number you have happens to be rational, you can also subcategorize it into integers, whole numbers, or natural numbers. Now, for all of these, that's no decimals and no fractions. Okay? So we tend to use the word whole numbers a lot for things that are not decimals and fractions, but whole numbers are its own category. Right? Whole numbers start with 0 and go only in the positives forever and ever and ever. But integers are actually numbers like that, but they go forever in both directions, so they include the negatives and the positives forever and ever and ever. And then natural numbers are a subcategory of whole because they only include the positive numbers but not 0. Okay? And please understand that 0 is neither positive or negative. Okay? So 0 cannot be positive or negative. All right, that's it on that one.